Hey everybody, Jimmy Smith, back right before the holidays. Of course, I got my Rick and Morty holiday shirt on. Awesome. Anyway, what we're going to talk about today is Conor McGregor's ridiculous plan, if you want to call it that. I don't believe it. I'll get into all of it. Fight against Logan Paul, apparently in India. I don't believe any of it. I don't believe a word of it. And I'll break down every piece of why I don't believe a word of it in a minute. First off, what I see is a classic dealing with bad news. I'm going to get back into fighting to change the news cycle about me. To give you something else that pops up when you Google Conor McGregor other than found liable in a civil trial for sexual assault back in Ireland. So he's trying to basically change the news cycle about himself. And whenever Conor McGregor has done something stupid, and there are plenty of examples of various levels, it's always, I'm getting back into the octagon, I talk trash about this fighter, I engage in some Twitter feud with this guy, to make fighting the conversation. When is Conor McGregor going to fight again? That's always where he goes whenever he's in trouble. For fighters, and a lot of athletes, but fighters even more because it's just about them. Whenever there's an issue in their lives, they know that the ring or the cage or whatever it is their safe space. As long as I'm knocking people out, as long as I'm winning, nobody cares about all these other things. Now, it happens in other sports too. As long as I'm slinging touchdowns, nobody cares about whatever personal problem I'm having, whatever legal problem I'm having. The problem is in team sports, there's more of a, it reflects on the team, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A lot more moving parts. In fighting, you can always ignore what's going on outside of the cage or ring by having success in the cage or ring. Now, Conor's not going to be fighting anytime soon. But this idea that I have something coming up, something nebulous on the horizon for people to focus on, is what Conor's trying to do. So, why it won't happen? The first big obstacle that not enough people are talking about is he's under contract with the UFC. He cannot fight for anyone else without the UFC's approval. Period. End of sentence. So, what people don't get a lot of times, and I know this fight is supposedly they're talking about it taking place in India. An athletic commission suspension doesn't apply to any other state outside of the one that suspended you. Now, states in the United States typically uphold suspensions from other states. If you're suspended in New York, it's functionally a suspension in the United States because other states tend to uphold the suspension of a given state. They don't have to. Great example is Mike Tyson versus Lennox Lewis. Nevada wouldn't give him a boxing license because of the press conference, the press conference fight that broke out with him and Lennox Lewis, and so they did it in Tennessee. That fight took place in Memphis, if I remember correctly. So other states don't have to; they typically do. Now, in this case, it made Tennessee a ton of money, so they gave him a license when Nevada wouldn't. So outside of the United States, that thing's toilet paper. You can be suspended by any commission in the United States, and it won't be upheld in Japan or Russia or any other country. That isn't the case for contractual rights to a particular fighter. What I mean by that is the fact that Conor McGregor thinks he can go to India and fight Jake Paul, the UFC will still sue to keep the fight from happening if they have contractual rights to you, which the UFC does. So the idea that the UFC allows him to go to India and fight Logan Paul in a boxing match is absurd. They're not going to allow that. I'll explain why in a minute. But the point is, taking the fight internationally doesn't change the contractual rights the UFC has over Conor McGregor, and they'll sue to enforce those rights. Same thing that happened with Ryan Garcia. He was supposed to fight an exhibition in Japan, and Golden Boy went, you can't go over there and fight anyone, even though he's suspended in the United States because of obviously the hot test after the Devin Haney fight. It's not the suspension. It's the fact that Golden Boy still owns you and you can't fight without compensating them. Now, I believe that was worked out, and then Ryan Garcia had an injury and ended up not doing it. But Golden Boy said publicly, you cannot just go somewhere else and have an exhibition without us getting paid. Now, why wouldn't Dana White allow him to box in India or anywhere else? Let me explain. The first thing is they allowed him to fight against Floyd Mayweather. Because, number one, it just increased his brand at the time. It increased his visibility, his crossover appeal. He was fighting the greatest boxer of his generation, maybe the greatest of all time. Slightly faded Floyd Mayweather. He wasn't in his prime. You could see it in that fight. But the idea that if he gets beat up, if he even looks competent for a couple rounds, which he did, he looked good in the first couple rounds, that will make him look better in the eyes of most combat sports fans. He's taken on one of the all-time greats as long as he doesn't get trucked in the opening round, which is not how Floyd Mayweather fights anyway. He typically takes the first couple rounds to figure you out, and then he overwhelms you. It just made sense. The gamble all the way around made sense for the UFC. And Conor was in a position to say, if you don't give this to me, I'm not going to fight. And he could cause a bunch of complications. The UFC could say, all right, this will increase his brand. The UFC got their cut. They got, I believe, 10%. And it made sense all the way around, and they did it, and it worked. It paid off. A bet on a Logan Paul fight will not pay off. It won't. For a few reasons. Dana White can say whatever he wants about how Conor will look when he comes back. Dana White is prepared for Conor to look terrible coming back. Terrible. Why? By the time Conor fights, it'll be a 4-year layoff probably. He's coming off from a devastating injury, shattering his shin, that no fighter has ever come back and looked like themselves again. They fought. Anderson Silva fought after shattering his shin. Chris Weidman fought after shattering his shin. Neither guy looked good. Neither guy looked like the fighter of old, right? So Conor is on the dark side of middle age, right, when it comes to fighting. He's in his mid-30s, coming off a shattered shin, hasn't fought in 4 years, and has every personal problem under the sun outside of the octagon. The idea that he comes back and looks decent to me is you're asking a lot, no matter who they put him against. If they put him against a UFC-level guy, someone who belongs in the octagon, right, who's pretty decent, who has a winning record, he's going to have problems. Dana White knows that. And what it is when he comes back, blockbuster fight, the return of Conor McGregor, it's still going to be a big deal. Let's assume, for the sake of this argument, that he doesn't look good. You still have that second fight, which is, all right, he came back, ring rust, didn't look good, coming off injuries, a lot of stuff going outside the octagon, but he's going to right the ship in this second fight. That one's big. After that second one, and please let me know in the comment section if you disagree, after that second one, you get really diminishing returns for the amount of money Conor McGregor costs. I'm not saying it's not worth paying, but can you headline a guy who hasn't had a significant win in 8 years? Right? Can you headline a guy who is losing and hasn't won other than Cowboy Cerrone? Once again, significant win was Eddie Alvarez 8 years ago. So the problem is that after the second fight, the novelty of him coming back, it just wears down. And I remember, everybody forgets, man, when Mike Tyson came back from his suspension against Evander Holyfield, he fought, anybody? Francois Botha, a boxer out of South Africa, who was actually beating him until, Mike landed the knockout punch. But you just started getting this kind of like, okay, Tyson's back. It just started, as he kept not looking good, fought a guy named Orlin Norris. The Lennox Lewis fight was big, of course. But then after that, you just started getting diminishing returns where, kind of like the return of Mike Tyson, you start seeing him not look like the old Mike Tyson. It only lasts so long. Now, of course, there was this big delay, and then he comes back in the Netflix thing. Well, people forgot. Most of the people who saw that, the Kevin McBride fight, stuff like that, that wasn't the audience that was tuning into the next Netflix fight. So my point is, you get diminishing returns when a fighter's like grand comeback they still look bad and maybe look worse than they did before. So what Dana White knows is that I only have a couple of those like big blockbuster, crossover, sensational Conor fights before he starts just becoming another fighter who doesn't have it anymore. Or Conor might step away from the sport. I don't see him taking a lot of ass whoopings, by the way. I see him taking one when he comes back, maybe that one after that to, I can get things back on track. Then he probably calls it a career. But I don't see him doing the BJ Penn, right, the Tony Ferguson where he loses and loses and loses. He's not going to do that. Doesn't have to. But my point is, if he allows him to fight Logan Paul, where I think he looks bad against Logan Paul in a boxing match. You lose that first blockbuster fight because he's not going to look good. Then he goes to the UFC. Let's argue that he continues fighting. You lost that big one. You lost his comeback. That's the big moment of Conor coming back, and it's in under someone else's promotional banner. And so the one you get is the one afterward where fans go, is he still the same guy? I look really bad against Logan Paul. This isn't Floyd Mayweather. This isn't Canelo Alvarez. This isn't a generational talent making your superstar look human. This is freaking Logan Paul. And so the idea that Dana White is going to give away that comeback fight and then take the leftovers, no way. His return to the UFC would be big, but after a Logan Paul fight, and once again, for the sake of this argument, I'm assuming he doesn't look very good in that fight. I'm not going to take a diminished Conor McGregor for my UFC return, where that should be, the bells and whistles and people going crazy should be his combat sports comeback fight. Should be under our banner where we make all the money. We're not going to let somebody else do that. And once again, adding in I don't think he looks good, and I don't know how much that second fight, which would be in the octagon, is going to sell. Because he's just not going to be the same guy. I don't see the UFC letting this fight happen, and there is no way you can go around it. There's no way, it's in India. No, the UFC is going to sue. They're going to do everything they can to enforce their contractual rights. And Conor doesn't have all right, if you don't, I'm going to retire. As far as a lot of MMA fans are concerned, the smart ones, he's functionally retired already. Right? I'm already retired. Basically, why do I care? Okay. If you don't let me fight Logan Paul, I'm never going to fight in the UFC. I don't think he ever fights in the UFC anyway. A lot of people don't think he fights in the UFC anyway. So the threat he had back when he fought Floyd Mayweather doesn't really exist anymore. Fans are basically used to him not being here. Fans are just, Conor's not going to be around? Okay. You have almost a generation of fans. 8 years is a long time in sports, period, let alone combat sports, since you've had a significant win. And there's a whole generation of fight fans who never saw that. If you are 16, you were 8 years old, maybe not allowed to watch combat sports the last time this guy had a significant win. And so he walks away forever. I never saw you as anything great anyway. The UFC needs that big comeback of Conor McGregor, and they're not going to allow that to happen for anyone else and anywhere else, and I think Conor knows that. I'm in talks, I'm deliberating, and then you got Stephen A. Smith talking about the Logan Paul fight because it gets attention away from all the stuff I'm doing, all my poor decision-making outside of the octagon. This won't functionally come together. And if they did, it would be, I think, a huge promotional mistake for the UFC. Let me know what you think in the comments section. I'll see you after the holiday.